The day I chose my own life a first-person narrative. I still remember the exact moment I realized I was done letting other people decide my future. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting at the desk in my bedroom, the same bedroom I'd had since I was 9 years old, still decorated with a gymnastics ribbon I'd won in 6th grade that I never bothered to take down. It was faded now, the blue turned almost gray, but I'd never removed it. I think I kept it because it was one of the last times I'd done something entirely on my own terms, trained for it, competed for it, won it, before the bubble my mother built around me grew thick enough to block out most of everything else. My phone buzzed. I was in the middle of a YouTube video. Some girl doing a room tour of her college dorm, unpacking things from Target bags and talking about how excited she was, and I paused it to check the notification. It was an email from the university's billing department. Your account balance for the upcoming semester is $9,847. Please resolve this balance within the next 14 days, or your course registration may be canceled. I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall. $9,847. For 1 semester. And I was supposed to do this 4 times. The girl in the video was still frozen on my screen mid-sentence, holding a throw pillow with a cheerful geometric pattern. She looked so certain about everything. She looked like someone who had never once questioned whether the next step made sense. My mom was downstairs. I could hear the TV, some cooking show she watched every evening, the kind where people make complicated things look effortless. She didn't know about the email yet. And for a minute I thought about just not telling her. Just pretending I hadn't seen it. Because I already knew what would happen if I did. She'd panic. Then she'd figure something out. She always figured something out. That was the thing about my mom. She was endlessly resourceful when it came to solving problems she decided were hers to solve. And I'd feel guilty for the rest of my life about it. And then I'd go to college, and I'd come out the other side 4 years later with a degree and $40,000 of debt strapped to my back before I'd even bought my first couch. I picked up my phone and Googled the average student loan debt in America. $37,338. That's the average. The average. For people who made it out the other side. That number didn't include the ones who dropped out and still owed. Didn't include the interest that kept compounding, while you were busy trying to find a job in a field that maybe didn't pay what you'd hoped. I put the phone down again. And I thought about the conversation I tried to have with my parents 2 days earlier. I'd done my research. That's the thing people don't understand. I didn't walk into that conversation half-baked. I'd spent 2 weeks reading Reddit threads, military forums, the official Navy and Air Force websites, veteran blogs, YouTube videos from women who'd enlisted at 18 and come out at 22 with college fully paid for, a skill set, a security clearance, and money in the bank. The GI Bill. The Montgomery GI Bill. Tuition assistance. The Post-9/11 GI Bill covers 100% of in-state tuition, a housing allowance, and even a book stipend. I knew the numbers. I'd written them down in my notes app and then transferred them to actual paper because somehow paper felt more serious. More like something I could hand someone and say, look, I'm not making this up. I sat both my parents down, my mom on the couch, my stepdad in the armchair he always claimed, and I said, I want to talk to you about something important. They looked at each other. That look. The one that meant here we go. The one that had accompanied every conversation where I'd tried to assert something about my own life. When I'd wanted to quit piano lessons at 14, when I'd wanted to apply for a summer job at 16, when I'd wanted to take the train into the city with my friends junior year. That look said, she's about to ask for something and we're going to have to manage this. I laid it all out. The debt. The cost per semester. The trajectory. I told them I'd been looking at the Navy and the Air Force because statistically they had lower combat deployment rates than the Army or Marines. I told them about the GI Bill. I told them I wasn't saying I'd never go to college. I was saying I'd go to college after debt-free with 4 years of real-world experience and probably some money saved. I had my notes in my hand. Actual paper. I printed it out. My stepdad started talking before I'd even finished my last sentence. You're not thinking straight, he said. You have no idea what the military is actually like. You could get deployed, my mom said. Anything could happen to you over there. The Navy and Air Force are statistically. Maya. My stepdad used my name like a period at the end of a sentence. You got into a good school. That's the path. That's how people build a future. I just showed you the numbers. I don't care about the numbers. I care about you making a stupid decision because you're scared of a little debt. I felt something close up in my chest. Not sadness. More like a door shutting, a quiet final click. It's not a little debt, I said very quietly. It's my entire financial future. Nobody responded to that. My mom changed the subject. Asked my stepdad if he wanted more coffee. My stepdad picked up his phone. And the conversation, if you could even call it that, was over. My paper notes sat on the coffee table between us, unread. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. And I thought about how many conversations had ended that exact same way over the last 18 years. There was something else nobody said out loud in that conversation. Something that hung in the air between us like smoke. I'm a girl. I don't say that to be dramatic about it. I say it because the moment I'd first mentioned the military to my mom, weeks before the formal conversation, just a passing mention over dinner, her face had done something specific. Something that had nothing to do with debt or deployment and everything to do with the fact that I was her daughter. Women in the military, she'd said carefully, like she was handling something fragile, face a lot of challenges that men don't. She wasn't wrong. I knew that. I'd read about it. I'd read the hard statistics, the reports, the accounts from women veterans who'd come home carrying things they didn't talk about at family dinners. I had read all of it at 1 and 2 and 3 a.m. in my bedroom with my door closed and the rest of the house asleep, and I had sat with it and I had not looked away. But I'd also read the other stories. The women who'd come back with engineering certifications and cybersecurity credentials and flight experience and leadership skills that most 22-year-olds couldn't dream of. The ones who'd served as intelligence analysts, logistics officers, communication specialists. The ones who described the military as the first place in their lives where they'd been expected to perform at exactly the same standard as everyone else around them. No cushion, no protection, no one deciding what they could and couldn't handle. I'd bookmarked dozens of those accounts, read some of them 3 or 4 times, because what my mom couldn't quite see, what I didn't yet have the words for in that dinner conversation, was that her fear for me was also in some way a statement about what she thought I was capable of surviving. And I needed to find out for myself. Not because I was reckless. Because I was 18 years old and I had never once been allowed to find out. Here's the thing nobody tells you about growing up with overprotective parents. It's not that they don't love you. They do. My mom loves me more than I can probably understand even now. But love and control can look almost identical from the inside. And for most of my life I couldn't tell the difference. I was never allowed to take the bus alone until I was 15. Not because I'd shown any indication of being irresponsible, I was by every available measure a cautious and sensible kid, but because the bus was out in the world and the world was where things happened. I couldn't sleep over at a friend's house without my mom calling that friend's parents twice to verify, not once, twice, and asking questions I would only learn about later secondhand, from friends who found the calls slightly alarming. I missed a birthday party in 8th grade because my mom decided the neighborhood it was in wasn't somewhere she was comfortable driving me at night. She didn't ask me how I felt about missing it. She presented it as a decision that had already been made. When I was 16 and every other girl in my grade was getting a part-time job at the mall or the coffee shop or the movie theater, my mom said I should focus on school. When I pushed back, I wanted money of my own, I wanted the experience, I wanted to have somewhere to be that wasn't home or school. She said we'd revisit it next year. Next year came and we didn't revisit it. When I was 17 and wanted to get my driver's license, there was always a reason to wait another few weeks. One week it was that we'd been busy. Another week it was that the test center was backed up. Another week it was something else. By the time I was 18 and heading to college, I was the only person I knew my age who had never sat behind a wheel. I want to be clear. I'm not saying any of this as an accusation. I genuinely believe my mom thought she was doing the right thing. She'd grown up in circumstances I only knew pieces of, a difficult neighborhood, a father who wasn't around, a world that had not been particularly kind to women who moved through it alone and unprotected. She looked at her own past and she built walls around me and she called it love. And it was love. That's the complicated part. It was love that left me at 18 without a driver's license, without work experience, without a savings account, without the ability to make a doctor's appointment for myself or navigate a government website or do any of the 100 small things that add up to knowing how to be a person in the world. And I was supposed to go to college in 3 weeks and figure it out. The thought of that, of arriving somewhere new and vast and completely unstructured with no practice at being independent, terrified me more than anything my parents were afraid of on my behalf. That was the fear nobody was talking about. I thought about my best friend Jasmine, who was heading to a state school 4 hours away and had been planning her dorm setup since March. Jasmine had a job. Jasmine had a savings account. Jasmine had been taking herself to the doctor since she was 16 because her mom worked 2 jobs and couldn't always make the appointments. Jasmine could parallel park, cook 6 different meals and file her own taxes. We'd been friends since 5th grade. I loved her completely. And I'd spent the last year watching her exist in the world with a competence and ease that I couldn't quite access, like watching someone move through a room in a language I hadn't learned. She didn't understand why I wasn't excited about college. It's going to be amazing, she told me maybe 100 times. We're finally going to be free. I'd nodded. I said, yeah, I know. I hadn't told her that what she called freedom felt, to me, like being dropped into deep water and told to swim when nobody had ever let me near the shallow end. She was going to be fine. I knew that about Jasmine, she was always going to be fine. I didn't yet know the same about myself. After the billing email, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed and I ran through the options like a loop I couldn't break out of. Option 1. Tell my mom about the email, watch her stress out, let her figure out a payment plan, feel like dead weight for 4 years while she worked extra shifts to cover a future I wasn't even sure I wanted. Option 2. Call the university, defer enrollment, come up with a plan on my own. Option 3. The military. I kept coming back to option 3. Not because it was easy, I wasn't naive enough to think it was going to be easy, but because it was the only option on the list that started with me making a decision rather than having a decision made around me. I thought about what I knew about the Navy and the Air Force. I'd been reading for 2 weeks, but I went back through my notes anyway. Something to do with my hands, with my brain, something that felt like forward motion at 1 a.m. The Air Force had a reputation for being more technical, more focused on specialized skills. Cybersecurity, intelligence, aviation operations, logistics, fields that built something transferable, something that meant something to an employer when you came home. The Navy meant ships and ports, travel, seeing parts of the world I'd only ever seen in documentaries. Both offered training. Both offered education benefits. Both would pay me a salary while I figured out who I was. And maybe this was the part one hadn't quite said out loud to anyone, the part one was only beginning to understand. Maybe I needed to be somewhere with clear expectations and clear standards and clear consequences before I could figure out how to set those things for myself. My whole life had been structured by other people's rules that I'd had no part in making. Choosing to enter a structured environment felt completely different. It felt like the difference between a cage someone else locked and a door you walk through yourself. I opened my notes app and I started a new list. Questions for the recruiter. Physical fitness standards for women enlisting in the Air Force. Job roles I was interested in. Timeline from application to ship date. Things I needed to know. I fell asleep with the phone on my chest sometime around 3 a.m., and for the first time in weeks I didn't dream about the billing email. The next morning I had a new problem. I wanted to talk to a recruiter. That was the obvious next step. You don't make a decision this big without getting real information from someone who knows what they're talking about. Every forum I'd read said the same thing. Go talk to a recruiter before you commit to anything. But the nearest recruiting office was 12 miles away. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a license. I couldn't ask my mom or my stepdad to drive me for obvious reasons. I had $14 in my bank account, which eliminated Uber. I had friends, but asking them meant explaining what I was doing before I was ready to explain it, and somehow that felt like the wrong order, like telling people about a plan you weren't sure about yet gave them the opportunity to talk you out of it before it was fully formed. I sat with the problem for most of the morning. Felt enormous. Which, I realized, said something important about where I was. 12 miles had become an uncrossable distance because I had never been allowed to develop the independence that would have made 12 miles trivial. And then I thought about my aunt. My Aunt Dana. My mom's younger sister. The one my mom described always as a lot to deal with, said with a particular kind of tired affection that I'd learned over time had more complicated things underneath it. Dana was the one who showed up late to Christmas and laughed too loud at things and said exactly what she was thinking in every situation regardless of whether the situation called for it. She'd been sort of quietly edged out of my life over the past several years. There had been some kind of falling out. I didn't know the details. My mom never talked about it directly, and I'd learned early that asking about Dana produced a certain kind of closed expression that meant the subject was over. But Dana still texted me every birthday without fail. Always something slightly irreverent. Happy birthday, kiddo. Don't let them make you small. I'd always liked that text. I'd never quite understood it until now. I had her number. I'd never deleted it. I stared at it on my screen for a long time. Here's what asking for help from someone your family has warned you about feels like. It feels like choosing a side in a war you were never given the full story about. Feels like a small betrayal of something. And I'd spent 18 years absorbing the lesson that Dana was unreliable, that she was chaotic, that she was, in my mom's words, a lot, and I'd never quite examined what those words actually meant or who had decided they were true. But Dana had never, in any interaction I could remember, treated me like I needed to be managed. She'd always talked to me like I was a person who could handle information. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Maya. She sounded surprised but not unhappy. Hey. Is everything okay? And something broke open a little. Not dramatically, not the way it does in movies with crying and heaving and someone saying let it all out. Just a quiet opening, like a window that had been painted shut for too long finally giving way. I started talking. All of it. The billing email word for word. The conversation with my parents that had ended with my notes sitting unread on the coffee table. The debt math I'd done. The military plan. The 2 weeks of research. The recruiter I couldn't get to. The $14 in my account. The driver's license I didn't have. I talked for probably 15 minutes without stopping. When I finally ran out of words, there was a brief silence. Okay, Dana said. First of all, I think that's a really smart plan. I hadn't realized until she said it, how much I needed to hear someone say that. Second of all, she continued, I will take you to the recruiter. Just tell me when. I exhaled so hard it was almost a laugh. Really? Really? You don't need to figure out transportation. I've got you. You don't think I'm being, I don't know, crazy, running away from something. I think, Dana said carefully, that there's a difference between running away and choosing to walk toward something else. From what you're describing, you've thought this through more than most adults think through major decisions. She paused. And I'll tell you something else, I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. What do you mean? And that's when she told me that she'd enlisted in the Navy at 19. That she'd served 2 years before a family situation pulled her home. That my mom had never talked about it, had, in fact, spent the years since then occasionally referring to it as a mistake, though Dana had never agreed with that characterization. I didn't tell you before because it wasn't really my place, Dana said. But since you're asking, I don't regret it. Not for a second. It made me who I am. I sat with that for a moment. My aunt, who my mom had called unreliable and chaotic, had done the exact thing I was considering. And she was fine. More than fine. She was the most self-possessed person in my family. Why did Mom never tell me? I asked. Dana was quiet for a second. Because it would have made it a real option, she said. Instead of something we don't talk about. We stayed on the phone for another hour. She asked practical questions about the GI Bill, about job roles, about what the physical fitness requirements look like for women, about timeline. Good questions. The kind that helped me think, not the kind that were really just objections wearing the costume of curiosity. By the time we hung up, something had settled in me. I sat at my desk and I opened my notes app and I kept adding to my list, but it felt different now. It felt like preparation instead of wishful thinking. I still had to call my dad. My dad and I have a complicated relationship in the specific, quiet way that relationships get complicated when someone isn't around enough to be complicated in more interesting ways. He lives 4 hours away. I see him a few times a year, Thanksgiving if schedules work out, a week in summer, sometimes a long weekend in spring. He's not a bad person. He's just someone who found it easier to be proud of me from a distance than to be present in the actual texture of my life. Earlier that week, he called to congratulate me on getting into school. He'd sounded genuinely happy. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. And I'd said thank you and meant it, even as some part of me registered the strangeness of receiving pride from someone who hadn't been there for most of what had earned it. Now I was going to call him and say I was thinking about not going. The phone rang 3 times. Hey Maya. What's going on? I told him. More concisely than I told Dana. I'd had practice by then, but completely. The email, the debt, the 2 weeks of research, the conversation with Mom that had ended with my notes on the coffee table. The military plan. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. That's a significant decision, he said finally. Yeah. Have you really thought it through? It's not a gap year. It's 4 years. I know. That's kind of the point. I don't want to make a small decision right now. I want to make a real one. Another silence. Longer. I hear you, he said. And something in the way he said it was different from the way my stepdad had talked over me. He actually sounded like he was thinking about what I'd said rather than waiting for his turn to redirect me. The debt situation is real. It wasn't like this when I was your age. I mean, there was debt, but not like this. Not the way it follows people now. That's what I keep reading, I said. What branch are you thinking? Air Force probably. Maybe Navy. I want to talk to a recruiter before I decide anything. That's the right instinct. He paused. How does your mom feel about it? She doesn't know I'm this serious yet. The conversation we had. She and Gary shut it down pretty fast. He made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, that sounds right. There was something in his voice when he said that, something that acknowledged a version of my mother he knew and I only knew partially. But he didn't elaborate and I didn't push. I think you should do what you think is right, he said finally. I can't tell you it's the safe choice because I don't know that. But I also can't tell you that the alternative is safe either. $40,000 of debt at 22 is its own kind of risk. That's exactly what I keep thinking, I said. Just talk to the recruiter before you commit. Get the full picture. I'm going with Aunt Dana next week. A brief pause. Dana. He said her name in a particular way, careful, like he was checking the temperature of it. Good. Yeah. She knows what she's talking about. Something unspoken passed through that sentence. The ghost of a family history I'd never been given full access to. Call me after, he said. I will. 10 days later, Dana picked me up at 9 a.m. in her silver SUV with a cracked phone mount and 4 reusable coffee cups in various cup holders and a hanging air freshener that smelled like cedar. She handed me a latte without asking if I wanted one, and she didn't say much on the drive over, just drove, and I was grateful for it. For someone who understood that not every moment needed to be filled. The recruiting office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation place. I stood in the parking lot for a moment before we went in. It was a gray morning, overcast, the kind of sky that can't decide what it wants to do. A woman in workout clothes walked past with a stroller. Someone in the nail salon was laughing at something. You ready? Dana asked. I thought about every moment that had gotten me here. The billing email. The notes I'd printed out that nobody had read. The 2 weeks of 2 a.m. research. The call with Dana. The call with my dad. 10 days of second-guessing that had eventually, quietly solidified into something that felt less like a decision and more like an acknowledgement of something I'd already decided. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Sergeant Reyes was a technical sergeant in her early 30s. She had the particular kind of stillness I'd later come to recognize as belonging to people who'd been through enough that the small stuff stopped costing them anything. She shook my hand and Dana's hand and offered us water and sat across from me with her hands folded on the desk and asked me to tell her about myself. So I did. The clear version. The one I'd been refining for 10 days. Not emotional, not desperate, just the facts and the reasoning. The debt math. The 2 weeks of research. The fields I was interested in, intelligence operations and logistics and cybersecurity. The reasons I was looking at the Air Force specifically. And the questions I had, including the one specifically about what it would be like to be a woman in the service. She listened to all of it without interrupting. Everything you've said makes sense, she told me when I finished. A lot of people come in here without having thought it through. You have. Then she answered my questions. All of them. She was honest about the challenges. Didn't smooth them over or tell me they weren't real. And she was also direct about the resources, the programs, the communities of women who'd navigated the same path. She talked about her own experience with a specificity that made it feel real rather than like a recruitment pitch. She walked me through the ASVAB and what it would mean for job placement. She explained the physical fitness standards, the medical screening process, the timeline from application to ship date. She told me about the ability to take college courses online during service, about tuition assistance programs that could let me knock out general education requirements before I was even out. We talked for almost 2 hours. At the end, she gave me her card and said, "Take a week. Think it over. Come back because you want to, not because you're running from something." There's a difference between those two things, and only one of them usually works out. On the drive home, I ate the sandwich Dana had picked up while I was inside, and I watched the strip malls and gas stations and neighborhoods slide past the window, and I thought about what Sergeant Reyes had said. Building versus escaping. Here is the honest answer: it was both. I don't think it does anyone any good to pretend otherwise. I wanted to escape something. The weight of debt before my adult life had even started. The suffocating particular shape of a life that had been planned without my input. That was real. But I also wanted to build something. I wanted to become someone who could be set down anywhere in the world and figure out how to survive. I wanted to look back at 18 and know that at least once, when the moment came, I had made the call. I told my mom a week after the recruiter visit. Kitchen. Morning. Coffee cups. Before the day could get complicated. She cried. I'd expected that. What I hadn't quite expected was the texture of it. The way her fear wasn't just general mother fear but something layered and specific to what I was and who she was. She was afraid for me the way only a woman can be afraid for her daughter. She'd spent 18 years building walls around me and calling it love, and I was standing in her kitchen telling her I was going to walk out through those walls on purpose. "I just want you to be safe," she kept saying. "I know. The military isn't safe, especially for women. You know what happens." "I've read everything, Mom." I asked about all of it. "Reading about it isn't the same." "I know." I kept my voice steady. "But I'm going." She looked at me for a long moment. And something shifted in her face. Something that was half grief and half recognition. Because she knew, I think, had always known, somewhere underneath all the careful management, that you can only protect someone from the world for so long before the protection becomes its own kind of harm. She stopped fighting it. Slowly, and not completely, but she stopped. She hugged me before I shipped out. It was the kind of hug that holds a whole conversation inside it. Everything too big to say out loud translated into something that doesn't need words. I held on for a long time. "Call me when you can," she said. "I will," I said. "I promise." Basic military training was 8 weeks. The first week, I thought I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Not because of anything dramatic, no single breaking point, no moment where I considered running. Just the accumulated weight of it. The 4:30 a.m. wake-ups. The constant noise and instruction and evaluation. The specific exhaustion of never having a moment that belonged entirely to you. I'd gone from a life of too much protection to a life of zero. No buffer, no softness, nothing between me and whatever came next. I called my mom after the first week, during the brief window we were given for personal calls. I didn't tell her it was hard. I didn't tell her I was tired in a way I'd never been tired before. I said I was doing fine, and she said she was proud of me, and I said I'd call again when I could. When I hung up, I sat in the small space I was allowed to sit in, and I thought about the gymnastics ribbon on my bedroom wall at home. Blue faded almost to gray. The last time I'd done something entirely on my own terms. By week 3, something had started to shift. It wasn't that it got easier, it was that I started to understand the shape of it. What was being asked of me wasn't beyond what I was capable of. It was exactly at the edge of what I was capable of, which is a completely different thing. Every morning I got up and I met the standard, and the standard didn't care how I'd been raised or what I'd been protected from or whether I had 18 years of practice or 0. It only cared what I did right now. By week 6, I understood why people come out of it different. Not broken, sharpened. Like something had been blurry about me for a long time, and someone had finally adjusted the lens. The night before graduation, I lay in my bunk, and I thought about the billing email that had started all of this. $9,847 for 1 semester. For semesters a year. 4 years. The number that had once felt like a wall had become something I'd simply walked around. I fell asleep before lights out. I've been in the Air Force for 8 months now. I'm at a base in the Southeast, in technical training for an intelligence operations specialty. I like the work, the precision of it, the way it asks me to pay attention and think clearly and connect things that don't obviously belong together. I'm good at it. I didn't know that about myself before. I like the women I've met here. Some of them are nothing like me. Some of them came from circumstances I have no frame of reference for. All of them have, in one way or another, shown me something about what it looks like to know your own edges, to understand exactly where you stop and the world begins. I talked to Dana last week. She's doing well. We text a lot now, almost every day. She's become the person in my family I call when I want to think something through. Not because she has all the answers, but because she treats my questions as worth taking seriously. She always has. The calls with my mom are getting easier. Not easier. She still worries, I can hear it underneath every conversation, but she asks real questions now. About my work, about the people I've met, about what I'm learning. She's trying. I think that's all I can ask. The debt I don't have is something I think about sometimes. Quietly, without fanfare. I think about what it would have cost me, not just in dollars, though $40,000 is a real number, but in some version of myself that never got to find out what she was made of. Some Maya who went to school 3 weeks after that billing email and came out the other side not knowing whether she would have chosen it if she'd been free to choose. I know now. I would have chosen this. If you're reading this and you're somewhere close to where I was 18, a girl who's been told her whole life that the world is dangerous for her, and that someone else needs to manage that danger on her behalf, I want to tell you something. You are allowed to decide what you can handle. Not recklessly. Not without research and real conversations and sitting with the hard questions long enough to actually answer them. But you are allowed. The people who love you are allowed to be afraid. Fear is allowed. What they are not allowed to do, what no one is allowed to do, is turn their fear into your ceiling. Find the Donnas in your life. The ones who've been told they're a lot, because they refuse to be small. The ones who have information your family would prefer you didn't have. Call them. Ask them the questions you're not supposed to ask. Walk into the strip mall recruiting office. Ask for the female recruiter if there is one. Ask the hard questions. Write down the answers. And then, when you've done all of that, when you've sat with it and second-guessed it and sat with it again and it still feels like the right direction, make the call. It's yours to make. It always was. Even when it didn't feel like it. Even when every door in your life seemed to be controlled by someone else. The decisions were always yours. It just took me 18 years and a $9,847 billing email to understand that. The author is currently serving in the United States Air Force. She plans to pursue a degree in intelligence studies under the Post-9/11 GI Bill upon completion of her enlistment. She is the first woman in her immediate family to serve.